Mercedes squad is coming out with a lot of surprises. I mean, look at Canada, look at what is about to come from the gladiator himself, James Allison, the first new updates, and what is to come of this Mercedes team. We're going to talk about it all today. We're going to start with Canada, speaking about why the team performed so well there. Then we'll go into the James Allison upgrades and what is the future to come for them. Because there is a lot of information on this and I can give you my insight on it. As for Canada, I wasn't able to speak about it because I didn't have the channel, but let's talk about it right now. The Mercedes team, they came in with no upgrades. It was a pretty upgradeless Grand Prix, except for the fact of actually Aston Martin, which I will be speaking about in my next video. I know a lot of people are anticipating that. But the actual Mercedes squad, why were they able to perform on a track that they said coming into this would be one of their weakest? Now, I still believe this to be true. I do think that Canada track doesn't really bring out the strengths of the W14. Something in the philosophy, the concept that they changed actually helped them perform here. I talked about in a video before as to why I thought they would perform a lot better here, and they did. They were able to go over the curbs a lot better. They were able to ride their car at a lower height. Something they did very much lack in was straight line speed. And I'm not talking about straight line speed without the DRS because they're actually pretty good on their drag. They don't have like a big lacking of drag. Like Aston Martin, that's a pretty draggy car, I would say so. The actual Mercedes squad doesn't have a draggy car. Their car is just kind of in the middle. I wouldn't say it's as elusive as the Red Bull, but it's pretty decent. Where they actually do perform very poorly on is its DRS efficiency. Its DRS efficiency is very poor, and for that reason, they're not really able to catch cars ongoing. I mean, George Russell was behind some cars for a lot of laps. I think he was cool in the brakes for a long time, but long story short, George wasn't able to catch a lot of cars because of the DRS lacking, even though the car is very quick in a straight line without DRS. But why did they perform? This would have been, on paper, their really best result, even if it was a 3 and a 4, even though they got a 2 and a 3 in Spain, if they were able to get a 3 and a 4 here, being maybe 10-15 seconds behind Max, that would be an accomplishment of, look, our car is so much better than we really thought it was. Like, it is upgrading. And they came out with very happy faces. I mean, now we got Toto Wolff talking about in Silverstone will be their first win, which I'll talk about later. I'll talk about that later. Don't want to get ahead of myself. But seeing as to how they performed in Canada, it's big hopes for what is to come in Austria. My reasoning being, it's a very rear limited track. We know in Austria there's a lot of traction zones, which actually don't really go to the Mercedes suit, but the high speed corners and the medium speed corners, specifically going through sector 2, which is the middle of the track, they will be pretty strong there. And even in sector 3, they should be pretty strong. It's going to be sector 1 after that long straight where they're kind of going to struggle going on to its gas pedal and really even going into the other turn, going into sector 2. It's going to be a very wishy-washy track for them. Even last year it was, but guess what? Lewis was actually able to perform pretty well there with the car. He actually finished on the podium. It was pretty lucky due to actually Carlos Sainz getting an engine failure and that Ferrari blowing up due to reliability every third race. But still, the car actually was performing decently there. In qualifying, they were actually looking to fight for a P2, P3 with the car that they had. So I do expect this to be a track where they can perform pretty well, but not to its highest potential due to what we've seen in Canada. Not as many curbs, so they don't really have that advantage that they kind of have with their suspension. It's a very high traction zone. That's what they're going to lack on, and their DRS efficiency, which, I mean, hey, Sector 1 literally is just a DRS straight line. Sure, the way you hit turn 1 will be important, but there's only so many ways you can hit turn 1. It's either you go on the yellow curb, you go straight down the middle, or you're too early into the corner. So it's not really going to be their best track when it comes to that. But a lot more for the future to talk about.
It's much closer than we would expect that at the beginning of the year we would have been murdered on this kind of circuit.
If I say you're going to win a race this year, which circuit will that be on?
Silverstone.
Let's talk about those James Allison upgrades. So the upgrades that came to the side pods, believe it or not, have nothing to do with James Allison. These were planned. It was planned for them to actually come with the car with side pods. We knew about this even in the beginning of the season. It wasn't something like, wow, we're seeing a completely, now it's revised, don't get me wrong. And James actually helped on this and overlooked what these revisions were going to be on this car, because the actual car before wasn't, it was kind of overlooked by him. It was mainly Mike Elliott. Mike Elliott was the one that actually really designed this new side pod concept coming in and how they were going to actually be able to perform on the car better. But with these new upgrades, it's going to be works on the engine cover, side pods, upper floor, and I guarantee they're probably going to add anything to underfloor. They have to still compete with Red Bull, and I still feel like there is a lot more performance to be extracted. Now, they were the first team to come out and say that floor isn't anything that we haven't seen or that we haven't been able to build. So obviously their floor is performing to their liking, and there is still a lot more performance to be extracted from that floor with a few tweaks, especially from its upper part. Mercedes has a lot of data in their floor. I mean, look at the W14. The whole car was exposed. It was really just floor that we were really looking at for a very long period of time with that W14. I mean, that's why we had the no side pod concept. They wanted to go with more floor to get more of the air going through the floor and extract more and have a really bullet in the straight line. It didn't work in that way because of the way that airflow works in these newer cars, and specifically talking suspension. But obviously the floor is the biggest factor when it comes to aero efficiency, something that they are kind of lacking as to why their DRS doesn't work as well. Their beam wing going really faster onto the track just doesn't perform at the level they want it to. So bringing really changes to its engine cover. I mean, if we look at the engine cover right now, the actual engine cover of the car is very much different to other teams, I would say. It's very extreme on its real bulkiness. So we called it shoulders before in the beginning of the year, and it really does. It looks like some buff shoulders. Like that Mercedes, that W14's been working out. They've been pumping weights, but maybe let loose a little bit, loosen up that front part of it, kind of what Red Bull and Aston Martin have. That's my theory as to the direction they're going to go into. And with the side pods, kind of like we see on the Aston Martin, what they've just added in Canada, they reduce the slide. And why they reduce the slide is because they don't need that rear downforce as much. Now, I think they're gaining a lot more of that rear downforce through its floor, its underfloor, so the actual side pods don't have to work on that as much. Now, I know Lewis even talked about in the past interview, he's like, wow, that Red Bull's rear end is crazy, but the Aston Martin's rear end might even be the best. It's stupidly good in traction zones. Alonso's driving style is a bit odd, and it kind of screwed him in the race, but that rear end is nice on the Aston Martin. It is a very, very nice and very competitive with the Red Bull. So I think that this Mercedes squad is going to take hints out of that real side pod concept and reduce its real slide going into its rear end to be able to pick up more rear downforce. The slide right now is helping them pick up rear downforce, as to why Canada was good, as to why I think Australia will be good. The slides, that's what it's there for. The airflow is there to bring it to the back to actually perform rear downforce. Something that they are very much trying to pull out of this car. It is the one thing this car lacks. It was why it was strong on tracks like Australia, like Spain, like even Jeddah was pretty strong for them, and they had pace to be with the Aston Martin. But throughout the year, there aren't that many front really limited tracks. The more tracks, when we go into these permanent tracks, I'm speaking Austria, I'm speaking Japan, all these tracks, they're very rear limited for the most part. I mean, like the permanent tracks are rear limited. You have traction zones are almost all rear limited. So the car has to have a good rear end. Plus that is to Lewis's liking. Lewis loves a car with a good rear end. Now the cockpit isn't changing. We know that. New chassis coming in 2024. We won't even speak about that. But it's really to do with the rear end. They need to buff it up, and that's what these James Allison upgrades are coming for. These are the first ones that he is overlooking and has designed himself. That is the big thing. I'm also thinking that they're going to bring in probably a new front wing spec and a rear wing, because the DRS efficiency is just clearly not on par with its competition, and I do feel like that is a big reason as to why they are struggling in certain zones on the track. That is the biggest thing coming for Mercedes' future. It's going to be rear end downforce. And if they can figure that out, in 2024, they will be just as competitive with Red Bull at the very beginning of the year. Because really the rear downforce is the most important part on a car. If you don't have the rear downforce, you're gonna lack on way too many tracks. And now they're able to lower the car a lot more due to permanent tracks, and it will be interesting to see. I genuinely think Silverstone will be a very competitive match going for them. I think they can fight with the Red Bulls. I think we might see even a 3-team fight. Ferrari will probably be pretty strong there, and Aston Martin. So I'm ready for this competitiveness. I'm ready for this W14 to take that next level, take off the shoulders, less working out. I'm excited. I'm excited to see what happens. To anybody that stayed at the end, watch the whole entire video, thank you all so much. Please subscribe, like the video. You guys mean the world, and peace.